The reading is taken from Luke's Gospel, chapter 21, verses 1 to 4. As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. "I tell you the truth," he said, "this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. And thank you, Anne, for reading that so clearly. So Jesus promises that he came to bring us life in abundance. And God's blessing is often depicted in the Bible in terms of abundant harvests. But we have a problem right now, don't we, with abundance? That really brings it home to us that we human beings do not deal well with the stuff of life. Of course, this has always been obvious in issues of poverty and inequality and conflict about resources. But now we see that progress and abundance is problematic too. The growing abundance the developed world has enjoyed since the Industrial Revolution is damaging creation. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution. This is triggering a wave of anxiety, especially among young people, and the situation is genuinely really troubling. And this damage brings increased poverty. COP26 has really brought this to our attention, and there are great glimmers of hope, and we need to continue to pray, because the enormity of the challenge facing the world is huge. And not only that, here in the UK, we have a more unequal society than ever. And COVID has only made things worse. I was shocked reading for work, actually, that those in the most deprived areas can expect to have 18 fewer healthy years than those in the least deprived areas. That's a shocking fact in a small, wealthy country. Jesus' message and Jesus' work has always been engaged in all of the real stuff of life. There have been times in church history when we've wobbled off from acknowledging this. But Jesus taught a great deal about money and wealth and how we should live. In fact, he probably said more about this area of life than any other issue. And we're coming to the end of a sermon series of his teaching about wealth. And it's been challenging, hasn't it? I think it's been uncomfortable sometimes. And taken together, that with everything in the news, it can all feel a bit overwhelming. Well, these verses pack a real punch too. But the message is both challenging and liberating, and I think it will really help us in moving forward in this area, because as we come to an end of this sermon series, we need now to reflect. Lord, what are you saying to me? What am I learning? What does this mean for my life? You may have already started to make some changes in response, or maybe you're still weighing things up. But we need to be thinking about, what is the Lord calling us to do differently? And these verses contain 3 really startling things. And by startling things, I mean 3 ways in which Jesus very directly challenges some of our taken for granted assumptions about wealth and about status. So prepare to be stirred up a bit. But we're going to warm up first. So we're going to warm up by setting the scene so that we can really understand what's going on here. So starting at verse 45, the beginning of our reading, Luke says, while the people were listening. So he locates this incident in a particular time and place, a specific memory of something Jesus did and said. And it was after Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, when the crowds had gone mad for him, there'd been great acclaim, it had been a really big deal. And it's in the days before the crucifixion. And Jesus is spending his time in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is thronged with crowds, there's a buzz about the place. Imagine Oxford Street just before Christmas. And Jesus is choosing to spend his time with his disciples in the temple. And he's at the heart of the temple, in the court where he's teaching, and there's a crowd around him listening. So far, so run-of-the-mill. That's what rabbis did. And there were people listening to him. But it was also a provocative move. Provocative for two reasons. Firstly, big crowds. Jesus was drawing bigger crowds than the other teachers of the law. And secondly, because of the message that the people were hearing. So setting it in the context of this time, we realise that Jesus knows he hasn't got long. So he's preaching what he knows people need to hear. And one of the big themes that he's urgently telling the crowd is how to live an abundant life, how to be heroes living life to the full. And his challenge is that the way to live an abundant life is to recognise who is in charge, who you are living for. He tells his listeners then and us now, everything that is comes from God and belongs to God. Everything you have, everything you are, all of the moments in all of your days belong to God. That is the way to live an abundant life, by knowing that and living that out. And you can live an abundant life of gratitude, faith, and devotion to God. Or you can live a life of devotion to the things of here and now, to wealth, to status, to being esteemed by others, even to being religious. That's the choice Jesus presents. You can live an abundant life, or you can live a life which brings transient satisfaction. And one day, we will all have to give an account of the choices that we make. So that's Jesus' big picture. And it's in the context of this teaching that we need to understand these verses. So, 3 startling things. And to illustrate startling thing number 1, I'm going to invite Mark to just go and sit in the place I have prepared for him. So, startling thing number 1 is that Jesus doesn't think that money is a private matter. And to illustrate this, I'd like you to imagine what it would be like if we decided to do things differently today. And as we leave, we make our offerings, and Mark sits there and watches. You may want to place things in the plate, or you might want to use the machine. Have you got the card machine, Mark? It's just behind him. And if you don't know how to do it, he can help you. In fact, he could key in the amount for you. What would that be like? What if we were really going to do that? What would that bring up for us? It would be profoundly uncomfortable, wouldn't it? We might feel angry. It could become coercive. It would be embarrassing. We might feel ashamed. And of course, that's why we don't do it. It wouldn't be helpful. But so the reason of doing that illustration is I hope it might help you if you can imagine what you would feel like in that situation, just to recognise how strongly we feel we need to keep money private and hidden. And we tend to think that money is something you don't talk about. It's maybe, I don't think that's just English, but it is very British. Oh, it is. Thank you. It's good to have a reflection from outside. So it feels uncomfortable to us. We don't talk about money, do we? But Jesus sat where he could watch people placing their gifts for the work of the temple. And not only did he sit, some commentators suggest he did it deliberately. Jesus did things very deliberately, so I expect he did. So he sat where he could see, and he watched, and he commented on what he saw. So Jesus didn't think that how we deal with money and stuff was just a personal, private issue. Well, why? I wonder why. And I've pondered on this, and I think it's because of how much Jesus loves us. And he knows the trouble we get into over money and stuff. Jesus knows that money and stuff it's not just a neutral commodity that we can use for good or we can use for bad. Jesus knows that behind the obvious, what we can see, are spiritual forces we can't see. There's a spiritual battle going on all of the time. And very familiar words, which Luke recorded a few chapters earlier, where Jesus was teaching about money, and he said, you cannot serve both wealth, or mammon is the sort of older English translation we know. You cannot serve both wealth and God. One or other will have your heart. So he personifies wealth in a way. He says there is a spiritual battle behind how we deal with stuff. And actually, don't we know that that's true in our experience? We worry about money. We worry about not having enough. We worry about not having enough even when we do have enough. We find it hard to let go of things. We find it hard to give things away. We worry about our possessions. We worry about how to look after them. We feel guilty around money and stuff. All of us, a phrase that I read, we all of us count our coins in the night. We worry about money. It can get a hold on us. We envy. We fix our eyes on stuff. We get over-focused on doing well. We get sucked into the idea that somehow our role or what's important in life is to accumulate more. Money and wealth can warp our thinking about ourselves and about other people. It can warp our choices in life. It can consume us. And even if you find it hard to identify with this in yourself, you can probably spot it in others. You can probably see that often a conflict between people, at the root of it, is money and stuff. You may be able to identify it in that I think lots of us have found this series of talks challenging and uncomfortable. And lots of us have also perhaps recognised that we've been around in the church a long time and not heard so much talk about money and wealth. And yet it's all there in the Gospels. So Jesus knows that we need help in this area. We need to be rescued from the hold money and stuff has over us, in order to be set free to manage all that God has given us in the service of God's love. That's not easy for us to do, and that's our calling. And in that way, we can be part of bringing God's kingdom on earth. And to do this, we need Jesus' help and we need one another's help. We need to be able to support each other openly and honestly if we're going to be able to fully enjoy all that God has given us. To be free from fear and to bless others with the resources in our hands. I would like to make the very un-British suggestion that it's wise to have at least one other person that you regularly talk honestly with about how you manage finances and possessions. And most of all, much more than that, it's something we need to talk to Jesus about. Because he does see how we use our money and resources. How much of our prayer times is given over to talking with Jesus about how we spend, give, save, use money? So, moving on to startling thing number 2. Jesus shows us in this incident that the world's values are completely upside down compared to reality. Who is the hero? Successful, powerful, wealthy people are not the heroes. As Jesus watches the people giving their gifts, it's nowhere suggested that the rich were being stingy. So he must have seen he saw wealthy people, we're told that. He must have seen some wealthy people giving large amounts of money that could make a real difference to the work of the temple. But he's not impressed. Jesus isn't just saying in his teaching that we should be more considerate of the poor and vulnerable and that we should give a bit more to charity or that we should increase the minimum wage a bit to make things a bit better. Reducing inequality is a really good thing. Giving to charity is a good thing, but this isn't what Jesus is saying. His message is much more radical than that. Jesus takes it for granted that we should care for the poor and vulnerable. And here we see him rebuking the leaders of this time for not doing so. But his message is far more radical. Because what he tells us is that the great person here, the hero, not the esteemed religious teacher, not the wealthy man who does so much to fund the temple, no, it's the person you overlooked completely. A woman of no standing at all, with almost nothing to offer, who just put 2p in the plate. She is the hero. She is the person who can teach you how to live. She is the person who will be teaching people how to live for centuries and centuries and centuries. Friends, we tend not to see this beautiful, radical truth. We are so easily blinded by a world which tends to lionize people of standing, people who are wealthy, talented, successful, confident, and so on. And then we falsely judge ourselves, and we falsely judge others accordingly. Jesus here shows us that the values of the kingdom of God are totally different. And the more we spend time with Jesus, the more he can open our eyes. And it's not only about wealth. Who are the heroes on a Sunday morning? Is it the band, our biggest band? Is it the service leader, Mark? Is it the person who prepares the talk? No, we're thankful for them all. But there are real heroes here who God sees. People who are dealing with so much in life at the moment that they feel they've got nothing to offer. People who've come by the skin of their teeth, got here by the skin of their teeth because worshipping God is important. And maybe they've also managed to offer a welcoming smile for someone else. God sees the real heroes. And maybe let's just pause and reflect for a moment on the upside-down values of the kingdom. Startling truth number 2, which shouldn't startle us because we've read about Jesus, we know Jesus, and yet we so easily forget and get upside down in our values about and think that we're judged by what we do, we're judged by what we have. Nonsense. So let's just pause for a moment and reflect on that, how much God loves us. Ready to be startled again? Startling thing number 3, it's not about how much you give, but what you hold back. Jesus says of this widow, she gave more than all the others added together. Well, literally, of course, she didn't. She gave much, much less. But the point is the meaning of the gift. They were rich and had money to spare after their gift. She was poor and also vulnerable, no husband bringing in the money. And yet she gave what she had, leaving the temple with nothing left. We might say that the other's gift was ticking the box, doing my duty, doing what's right, and hers represented devotion and dependence on God. Whoa, you might say, does that mean that Jesus is asking us to give literally everything away? That's just not practical. Well, that is the calling for some people, and it always has been down the years, but not for everyone. But the calling for all of us is to offer all that we have to God. And that does mean giving so that we notice, not out of the change after we've had all we want. And some of us, probably all of us actually, at times, we might say yes in theory, but then when the rubber hits the road, all of us will balk a bit sometimes. How can Jesus ask this of us? Well, that's where we need to remember the big picture, Jesus' big picture. Everything we have, even our lives, is from God. Our resources aren't ours. They are God's resources in our hands. The Christian walk is about submitting to this and turning away from grasping at it for myself and instead placing all that I am and all that I have in Jesus' hands every day. And of course, some of us will find this hard because we get really tied up in anxious, guilty knots. And we need to remember that we're placing everything we have in the hands of God who loves us so much that he didn't even hold back his son in order to rescue us. His love for us is more than we can imagine. And we need to spend time every day bathing in that, or we won't be able to live this well. Living generously is a response of gratitude and a response of trust in God's love. So what might it look like living generously? So it might be living more simply, consuming less so that we're taking less from the world's resources, and we are able to give more to support those who are struggling to make ends meet. It might be thinking really, really hard about savings. John Wesley, as a young man, worked out how much he needed to meet his commitments of daily life. and pay his bills. And he gave the rest away. And there was very, very little that he could give away at the time that he first did this. And he determined that if his income rose, he would keep a cap on his expenses so that his standard of living didn't rise, but what he was able to give did rise. And he stuck to this throughout his life. And by the time he died, he was giving huge amounts away in proportion to what he was keeping. And one of the things which struck me when I was reading about this, which I didn't know before, was that part of his pattern was to do it really quickly. And I thought that's such good advice, so that when he received money that he was able to give away, he did it almost immediately so that he didn't have it, because he recognised that once he had it, it was hard to hand it on. And that really strikes a chord with me. You know, so often the good things that I plan to do get lost between the planning to do them and the doing them. I don't know if you're the same. I think we are all the same. So that is an amazing example of giving. And that was a big calling. But what's the next step for each one of us? It might not be about giving, it might be about living differently, using the car less, shopping so that our purchases does good to the environment or supports those who produce things rather than exploits. And it's not just about money. How can we live generously with our time and our talents? It may be doing a small kindness for someone who's having a tough time. Last week at work, I was with a group of people who are living with some really difficult health conditions, and a couple of people shared how something really small and random in a way that someone had done for them had it was a bunch of flowers, actually, I think, in both cases, out of the blue, had made such a big impact that had really carried them through the difficult thing that they were dealing with at the time. So small acts of kindness, God can use them in big ways. So it may be something like that. It may be being willing to give it a go and volunteer in a new way, even though you might feel anxious at first. And I think some of us are finding it challenging in this area of how much do I offer to do? I think for a lot of people, the experience of lockdown taught us that we were overcommitted, overstretched, too busy. And now we might be feeling a bit stuck, wary of offering our time in case we go back to that. So struggling to live generously in this area of life. Some of us will find this topic really hard because we're living with real financial challenges, bills or debts that you can't see how you're going to meet. And if that's you, I'd really encourage you to confide in somebody you trust in the church, because living generously as a body means that we support each other when these times come. Or maybe your situation is such that you feel bad that you're able to offer so little in terms of money or of time. And these verses tell you that God does not look at the amount you give. God never asks of us what we do not have to give. What we have to offer may seem so small, almost pointless, compared with the need. The widow's gift was tiny, and Jesus has used it hugely. How might he use what you have to offer? And mostly, this works out in our day-by-day, week-by-week lives, in lots and lots of small things. But sometimes there are big choices. It might be about career choices. And as I was preparing, I remembered a man called Robert that I met a long time ago, actually. I was going to say 20 years ago, it was probably 30, but a long time ago in a previous job. And Robert worked in my team, and he was really good at his job. He was really good at his job, he was really conscientious, he was really reliable and really gifted. And so when it came round to appraisal time, of course, I talked with him about promotion because he was so obviously able to take on more responsibility and would have been really good. And that's what most people want, isn't it? And Robert said to me, I'm a Christian and I feel called by God to lead a charity, a particular charity, working with people in a lot of need who were, it was a group of people where there wasn't much provision. And that takes up an enormous amount of my time. I can afford to live on the salary for this job. If I was to go for promotion, I couldn't continue to serve with my church in this way. So I'm not going to go for promotion. And that made a huge impact on me. So he was making a big life choice to give generously by not taking an opportunity to advance his career in order to be available to serve. And equally, over the years, I've met Christians who have taken big jobs, which they know will require real sacrifices, and they will have less time for other stuff, because they know that God is calling them into that. So there's no rules, you shouldn't take the job, but it's about in these big decisions, in these career choices, the same thing. It's we are God's, and we bring these choices to God. We need to bring these choices to God so that he can steer us into the right places. In my experience, the adventure of the Christian life in the area of how we live with whatever resources we have been given is endlessly changing, endlessly challenging, and full of opportunities to really grow and be blessed. You learn something, and then Jesus shows you the next step. And sometimes it seems a big one, and you gulp and struggle a bit before you take it. I know I have a lot more to change in this area. The most important thing is that we are honestly and openly keeping on talking with Jesus about these things, asking him, what is the next step for me? These short verses have an absolutely liberating message. The woman we meet here, in giving all she had, was a signpost to what Jesus was about to do to free us from the prison of living a limited, me-centered, fearful life. And that includes freedom from the hold of money and stuff. I wish it was as much fun in here as it is out there. I wish I could make you laugh. Anyway, this woman, when I say Jesus used what little she had to give massively, the way he's using it is she shows us what freedom looks like. The freedom that Jesus offers looks like being able to give, to live generously, giving what we can, freed from the fear of not being enough, not freed from the fear of not being good enough, freed from shame if we feel we have little to give. She shows us that the freedom Jesus offers looks like being able to live generously, freed from the fear of not having enough, free to give and not hold back, trusting in God to provide for our needs. I'm going to end with the words of Paul. I have learned to be satisfied with what I have. I know what it is to be in need and what it is to have more than enough. I have learnt this secret so that anywhere, at any time, I am content, whether I am full or hungry, whether I have too much or too little. I have the strength to face all conditions by the power that Christ gives me. Amen.